All right, thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for spending these few days with us. It's been a great forum as it always is, and looking forward to ending on a high note here. I'm going to have our panelists each introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to jump into to this topic on the big ideas that'll guide innovation going forward. Paul?
Hello, everyone. Paul Anderson, Chief Academic Officer at Mass General Brigham.
Cool.
My name is Nicole Davis. I'm a scientist and a science communicator working with MGB for probably the last 10 years on projects related to the forum.
Maurizio Fava, I'm the chair of the Mass General Brigham AMC Department of Psychiatry.
Mark Suchin, the executive director of the Mesh Incubator and co-director of the Innovator Growth Division.
Great, thank you. So what we wanted to do is, in this panel, is highlight a set of work that's been undertaken over the past few months, and just from a framing standpoint, mapping the future of innovation, as we've been doing over these past few days, is one thing. But actually realizing the impact of that innovation is yet another. And we believe that realization happens at the confluence of unmet needs, as well as the big ideas, the big innovations, the big ideas that are happening in healthcare, happening in life sciences, and can impact the outcomes that can ultimately be delivered to patients and communities. And so with that in mind, the panel is going to present and discuss this ambitious effort to help chart a course toward the future by identifying the big ideas that could change healthcare over the coming decades. Over a months-long process, as I mentioned, a broad set of representative stakeholders from across clinical areas, scientific areas, the business parts of healthcare and beyond were engaged and interviewed one-on-one about the big ideas that they see shaping the future of healthcare innovation. And then our innovation team, under Nicole's leadership, analyzed everything that came out of this work and identified the top 12 big ideas that we really felt kind of combined that, again, unmet need with where there is opportunity based on what's happening in innovation today. We could have probably filled an entire conference with those 12 ideas. So instead, we're going to pick a subset of them and try to jam it into 40 minutes here at the end of the session. And hopefully it provides some kind of fruitful fodder for future conversation on each of these topics. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nicole to share a little bit more about the process and where we're going.
Thanks, Niam. Yes, just to set a little bit of context on this project, it's actually a continuation of something we started last year and actually presented on the stage last September. And that was an effort to speak with over 100 MGB leaders, clinicians, innovators, about what were the unmet needs that they were seeing from their perspective. And it's just to underscore, this is a really pretty special and unique opportunity to do this kind of work at a place like MGB as the largest hospital-based research system in the US, to really get these perspectives from folks on the front lines. Last year's effort, I'm not really going to go too deep into it other than to say that we surfaced a number of important themes, and I just do want to highlight those before we dive into our discussion last year that were reflected in the unmet needs that folks spoke to me about. These themes include a systems view of human disease and the practice of system medicine, a global view of infectious disease, including antimicrobial resistance, an expansion in high-quality real-world data that closes important gaps in our current data, improving health and healthcare across key populations, addressing major diseases of the brain, including both neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric conditions, as well as opening an era of precision medicine across disease areas. So our intention this year was to surface big ideas that are fit within these themes and really are going to catalyze new thinking and innovation and drive progress for patients. And we spoke with nearly everyone that we spoke with last year, as well as a few others, asking them where to focus innovation to solve these major problems. I just want to thank everyone who participated in this process, both the one-on-one interviews as well as the analysis over the last several months. We really couldn't have created such an impactful set of ideas without their participation.
Great, thank you. So with that in mind, jumping into the first topic, and Paul, I'm going to ask you to speak to this one first, and then certainly others can add. The first big idea that kind of coalesced from this was blazing new trails in the clinic with next generation genome editing technologies. And as many of you know, this past year has seen some really remarkable milestones in the field of genome editing, particularly in the areas of base and prime editing. I know many people have probably heard the story about baby KJ, the baby that was born with a rare genetic disease, who received a bespoke genome editing therapy last February and is now thriving. And that was due in part to the scientific discoveries of teams at Mass General Brigham and at CHOP, which highlights not just the remarkable collaborations that are needed to bring this sort of technology to fruition, but also the power and precision of base editing. So Paul, could you share a little bit more about this big idea, how you see it unfolding?
Yeah, Niam, this is one of the most extraordinary examples of a basic science discovery, which was rapidly translated to the clinic to produce new medicines that can really treat and even cure our patients. This process has the fingerprints of MGB all over it. It began with studies from Jennifer Doudna, who trained with Jack Szostak at MGH, one of our Nobel laureates. And when Jennifer went on to start her own lab at Berkeley, she quickly discovered an amazing phenomenon which we all know of as CRISPR. And CRISPR is really a bacterial immune system in which bacteria, which are subject to infection with bacteriophages, have developed a process by which an endonuclease, known as Cas9, can couple with a guide RNA encoded by the bacteria. And that guide RNA is complementary to the DNA in that bacteriophage. So it can direct the endonuclease to the bacteriophage DNA and basically chop it up. So that's an antiviral response. Now, very quickly, a number of investigators, many of them at MGB and in the environment that we're in here, made some bioengineering steps which allowed that to advance both scientific discoveries and clinical discoveries. So on the science side, it became clear that if one engineered a guide RNA which was synthetic but targeted and was complementary to a gene that one was interested in within the genome, one could target this Cas9 endonuclease to that gene and essentially eliminate that gene. So that allowed us to really discover what a gene and its encoded protein does in a cell. So incredibly important, allowed for CRISPR screens, allowed for all kinds of discoveries. Of course, very quickly, the clinicians got on board and said, well, if I want to get rid of a gene which causes the disease, maybe I can use this pathway. And so very quickly, this pathway was used for things like reducing the level of transthyretin, which is a protein which accumulates in the heart to cause cardiac amyloidosis. So if you use this pathway and knock down CRISPR, the transthyretin, you can actually treat this particular disease. Or if somebody has hypercholesterolemia, you can actually target PCSK9, which is a gene whose protein product actually is required to raise cholesterol. And if you knock it down, you can actually reduce cholesterol levels. And the MGB investigators involved in these pathways are people like Ben, people like Keith Young, and others. Very quickly, these investigators also recognized that if one actually took that Cas9 gene and fused it to certain enzymes, for example, a deaminase, one could deliver that particular complex to a mutated gene which causes a disease. So if there's a point mutation, for example, in this inborn error of metabolism in this baby KJ, there was 2-point mutations in a protein involved in the urea pathway. And if you mutated it, there was an accumulation of ammonia in the cells, killed the cell, and the baby doesn't live very long. So, Ben, together with collaborators at UPenn, were able to make a bespoke treatment targeting this particular mutation using base editing. So by coupling a deamidase to this particular Cas9, they could actually change the base, either from cytosine to thymidine or from adenine to guanine, to convert it back to the normal. And when they did that, this baby actually thrived. And so with a 6-month window, they made this bespoke therapy. Of course, that therapy costs many millions of dollars, and we're going to talk later about healthcare and how we allocate our resources, so that becomes an issue there. I would just also add that other enzymes have been added to this. If one adds, instead of a amidase, a reverse transcriptase, one can replace a stretch of nucleotides which are involved in a disease and correct that particular disease. And there's other patients now that have been treated with that method known as prime editing. And then finally, there's a phenomenon known as epigenetic editing, in which the cleavage activity of Cas9 is eliminated, but you still target that Cas9 to a particular gene locus, and then by introducing things like methylases and acetylases, one can actually change the expression of that gene either up or down to regulate a particular disease. So all of these have rapidly gone to the clinic. They allow us to potentially now treat a whole family of thousands of rare genetic diseases, but also common diseases like hypercholesterolemia, or many of us who just have high levels of cholesterol. Maybe we can just deliver this with a lipid nanoparticle delivered once a year and actually lower all of our cholesterol. So just an extraordinary example of how a basic discovery has gone to change clinical practice, and really an example of how MGB investigators have sort of been all over this process.
I have a follow-up question for you, Paul, but before that, anything others would add?
I just want to say, the evolution of this technology has been really stunning, because the work that Paul was first referencing on CRISPR, those papers showing that functionality in human cells were published in 2013. So when you kind of put that into perspective and see, we've gone from, editing genes in a dish to editing genes in humans, and then with the baby KJ story to a 6-month time span making a bespoke therapy. It's really impressive, and the promise is remarkable.
So Paul, or I'll open it up to you as well, Nicole, if you want to chime in. I won't hold you to this, but what does this space look like in 5 years, in 10 years?
I think a big unanswered question is how to actually get the proper delivering. Right now, most of the genes that are diseases that are being treated have a high expression in the liver. And if you just give a particle like a lipid nanoparticle, it tends to accumulate in the liver. So that's good if your target is in the liver. But if your target is in the heart or your target is in the lung, that's more challenging. So I think we really have to solve that sort of targeting. But I think immediately it opens the door to thousands of rare genetic diseases, which in the past we had actually no way to address. And then we'll talk later, and you can help us figure out the finances of how we actually do that.
All right, so switching gears here a little bit, the next big idea that we want to talk about is tackling the youth mental health crisis. Over the last several years, going back, especially in the wake of the pandemic, clinicians and parents have grown increasingly concerned about mental health in kids, and there's good reason for that. For kids aged 10 to 14, suicide is now the second leading cause of death. 1 in 5 kids will experience a mental health disorder this year, and depression and anxiety are among the leading causes of illness and disability in youth. So it's a true public health crisis. Maurizio, give us some hope.
Well, thank you, Liam. There's no question that right now anybody who has a family member or a friend with kids realizes that we have a problem of access to care for kids with mental health issues. We're very fortunate to be in Boston, where we have an incredible number of talented psychologists, psychiatrists, but there are many parts of the country where sometimes you can't find anybody to see your kid, And there are many tragic stories as a result of that problem for access. You know, the U.S. has estimated that there's a shortage in the U.S. Of over 50,000 psychologists and over 14,000 psychiatrists. And if you look at child psychologists and child psychiatry, that shortage was even more dramatic. So what can we do to address this? I think there are many things that we can do you know, to help with the crisis. One is at the level of policy, and you're going to say, why policy? Why should we care about policy? But an example is access to smartphones in school. It's now well established that this has a detrimental effect on a number of kids. And a number of states have begun to really prohibit the use of smartphones in schools. Here in Massachusetts, the Shaw Foundation has been very active in advocating for this. Stu Ablon, one of our psychologists, has been a leader in this. You know, we're seeing policies in some ways, hopefully acting to prevent the emergence of mental health issues in our youth. The second thing is to leverage digital tools. We'll never catch up with the 50,000 people shortage of psychologists, but what we can do is leverage technology. And Moshe Bar, who's a neuroscientist in our department and in Israel, has developed with a biotech company is kind of a smartphone intervention. This is the other side of the smartphone. That is a game that actually treats depression. It's a gamified thing that, you know, that forces you to think positively, if you wish. And you know, the studies that have looked at this tool are very encouraging. So leveraging technologies, similarly virtual reality interventions to promote resilience. Daphne Holt and her team at Mass General have developed these interventions that are leveraging virtual reality to enhance resilience, reduce anxiety and depression in kids. And then, of course, the more traditional interventions that can be delivered through technologies are more cognitive behavioral interventions. The Mass General Center for Digital Mental Health has clearly developed a number of apps in collaboration with Koa Health and our group led by Dina Hirschfeld and Aude Hennen are focusing on a kind of CBT for resilience in kids. But you know, overall, I see that technology can really help us, A, to prevent mental health issues, B, to treat kids that experience difficulties, and C, you know, I think that these interventions can also be helpful for stress reduction. As we know, the stress can be a trigger for mental health issues. So overall, I'm optimistic, but we ought to really adopt dynamically these new tools because we're not going to be able to use traditional methods to address the tremendous need.
What you mentioned, overall you're optimistic, so you answered one of the questions I was going to ask. As you think about the adoption of these new tools, what can we do to accelerate that? What are the barriers to adoption?
Well, it's a great question, Ian. I think that the barriers in some ways are often reimbursements. That is, you know, if you're a biotech company trying to develop an app that could be life-changing for kids, but nobody pays for it, that is a challenge. It's not uncommon for, hopefully I'm not offending anybody on the insurance business, that sometimes we don't reimburse things that are more aimed at prevention. But in my mind, in kids, that's where we need to invest. We have to, so I would love to see us on the insurance side be very open to reimbursing digital efforts for prevention, promoting resilience, stress reduction in kids, rather than leaving it up to families to sort, the thousands of apps that are on the internet, and you don't know which one is helpful and which one is.
That's great. Thank you, Maurizio. Anything others would add?
I mean, I can chime in, taking off my professional hat for a second, but as a parent, I have 2 teenage sons and a 10-year-old daughter, and you echoed something here about giving parents guidance. I think that is really a deep need. My kids have grown up in a world that that only has smartphones and digital tools and social media, and as a parent navigating that, it feels a little bit like you're in the Wild West. And I think there is a little bit of a slippery slope of technology. We think we have to be cautious, especially with some of the new AI-based tools on ChatGPT. If you read the New York Times, there was a piece there yesterday about some really heartbreaking stories about those particular pieces of technology. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and both promise and some peril that we have to be wary of.
Well, you just mentioned AI. Let's turn to the positive side of it. Mark, maybe I'll start with you here. We've heard a lot in this session. Actually, I think we made it to 21 and a half minutes into the panel without anybody saying AI until Nicole just said it, which is probably a record for this forum. We've heard a lot about the excitement around AI and what AI can do in transforming healthcare. One area, and this is a particular area of interest for me as well, as I think about kind of resource allocation and challenges in the financial model in healthcare. One area where AI is poised to have a really fundamental impact is in augmenting the role of clinicians, particularly as we think about extracting, presenting patient data. And so this idea is around an AI-native agentic care operating system. Mark, can you share a little bit more?
So only positive things, or?
Oh no, please negative things too. Yes, actually, really important.
Thinking about this question, a lot of big ideas around this came in, and Cerner and Epic, when were they founded? Over 40 years ago, before I was born. And I don't know many technologies that have gone 45 years essentially unchanged, or, doing the same one thing. And records are records, right? They're just that. They're meant to be archives of data. That's what they're built for. And of course, the modern electronic health record has, components and modules and functions, but they're not really built for the clinician, for the healthcare worker. And so, I think AI has the ability to be that first big leap in the history of development of electronic health records. I would say, like you said, maybe a health operating system as opposed to a record. Some people might say semantics, but I would imagine, maybe having the record and the database there, but maybe when you log in, there's not 50 tabs of, labs and notes and past exams. Maybe it's something as simple as a blank page and talking to the patient, and ambient AI transcribing that note using generative AI in real time, and then personalizing the care, right? So instead of, as a physician, looking up the labs, maybe as a diabetic, I'm looking at HbA1c, trending them over time myself, maybe that information is brought to the forefront during my patient visit or just prior because it's relevant to the specific disease process in this patient. And so, you can even go beyond that. Agentic AI, we talk about order workflow. So maybe, AI in the operating system of the future suggests, hey, this is the trend of HbA1c, this is the sugars, this is this patient's context, their history. Maybe you change their medication to this or change their dose to that. And I'm simply approving that recommendation based on the current latest evidence that is presented to me. So a change from health records from passive to active participants in the patient-doctor relationship. I would also say continuous monitoring and early warning. So, one anecdote, I always wanted to do good in med school. I wanted to be, honors student. I would always, during my ICU rotations, go really early, so like 5 a.m. at MGH or Brigham. And one of the things about ICUs is that you're really closely monitoring any changes in the patient condition to go up or down, which can happen really fast. And so we would look at things like, trend vital signs over time to see, is this patient at risk for early sepsis? I might have a roster of 10 or 15 patients, trending them, just looking at the record, digging through it myself, just my own, knowledge and pathophys. There's no reason why we can't have agents in the background doing that constantly and bringing early sepsis warnings in this specific example to the forefront and saying maybe you should intervene. The last thing I'll say is that the promise of AI is that it's sometimes thought of as a one-stop stop for all your knowledge. In healthcare, ChatGPT is going into health, other companies are. I actually think AI holds great promise for hyper-localizing information in a learning health system, which we had a panel on yesterday. And so, the health system, we have MGH, we have Brigham, but we have over 40 affiliates. And they're in very different zip codes. There's one in Chelsea Urgent Care, we have Cooley Dickinson, we have other very separated systems. And that means the sociodemographics are different, the language is different, the pretest probability of certain diseases is different. So what if MGB has a learning health system or an AI that draws insights from results from patients in that locale and presents them to me and to the clinicians as relevant to the zip code of that patient, let's say. And that's a learning health system. That's a cutting edge health system that's enabled by AI. And I think institutions that do that and do that seriously will be at the forefront of the AI revolution.
Anything, other panels?
Maybe I'll just add, I'm a rheumatologist. We treat patients with rheumatoid arthritis. There's about 5 biologics you can choose from to treat these patients. We know that patients will respond to 1 or 2 of them, but not the others. Traditionally, we've sort of just sequentially marched through them. It takes 3 months to figure out if one works. So by the time you get through all 5, you're over a year in. By then, there's a lot of joint damage done. People have shown that if you use AI to just monitor all the different parameters of a patient, you can actually help to select which one is likely to work in that patient, which is incredibly valuable for us and for the patients.
That's a great real-life example. Thanks, Paul. So there were a couple of comments during, as we talked about gene editing, as we talked about tackling the mental health crisis, about funding. And another funding challenge going on in healthcare right now is kind of the rethink of funding for biomedical innovation. Right? And how we need to reinvent biomedical research funding. We've seen a number of changes at the federal level that are fundamentally changing the research enterprise. And there are pressures now to make this system, this engine of innovation, certainly for this region, but also for the country more broadly, more streamlined, more efficient, more impactful when it comes to human health. And Paul, maybe you can share some more about this big idea about reinventing the research funding ecosystem, and then I'm sure others will have something to add.
And we certainly have to diversify our revenue. We put all of our eggs pretty much in the NIH basket right now. Right now it's under disruptive change, so we're going to have to really figure out a way to manage that. But we need to lean into industry collaborations. We need to lean into really increasing our efficiency, increasing the way we do things, understanding that there's some areas that we're particularly adept at as an academic medical center. We have patients, we have patient data. We should probably, focus on that to the degree that we can. But probably the most important thing and a very low-tech thing is education of our constituents, our fellow Americans, fellow individuals in the world. Sometimes the people who are spreading disinformation are better at communicating than we are. So I think we really have to double down and just tell the stories of how the discoveries that we make, the clinical trials that we run, really change lives, cure diseases, because everybody has a family member, a colleague, a friend who has one of these diseases. Every congressperson, every senator has them. So I think the more we can sort of double down on the education, the better off we'll all be.
Maurizio, I know you think about this topic a lot.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that in my mind, we have to do as Paul, I completely agree. As Paul suggests, we have to diversify our portfolio, and we have to, in some ways, be much more user-friendly for industry and biotech, and that's something that at MGB we're certainly doing that. We have to also change the perception that academia is too cumbersome, too too bureaucratic to work with for industry. And again, MGB is working on that. But another thing that in my mind we have to leverage is philanthropy. Because at the end of the day, I don't know any philanthropist who is not interested in some aspect of health. And in my mind, sometimes I remember Roman DeSantis mentioning that someone who left a lot of money elsewhere was asked by Roman, who took care of her, how come you didn't think of Mass General? She said, well, I didn't know you needed any money. So I think that fundamentally we have to be open with philanthropists about the fact that this is the time that we need philanthropic support, and for them to know that they're making a difference is really important, because in some ways their donations can be an extraordinary legacy to their commitment to a particular aspect of health. So we need to change, as doctors, our reluctance to seek philanthropic support, because this is a time when we need to be really upfront about the need for help.
It's all great points, and those are the major things I can think of. The one thing I would add might be a little bit of a mindset shift in research, from publishing papers to the end goal being clinical impact. And I think certainly at a place like this, many folks already prescribe to that. But the system of academics and promotions is very focused on certain metrics, and they're not always getting things to the bedside and making true measured outcomes changes. And I think little things like, we review pitch decks at the innovation office constantly, and you often see amazing research. But then, the question becomes, what's the problem? How do we actually fit this into a story? Well, simple things like educating researchers and clinicians to think about commercialization from the earliest stages, what that story is, validating that idea, I think can go a really long way. And you just saw amazing presentations of folks who really have done that.
That's great. Very powerful. All right, so we have time for one more here, and we'll make it. We'll end the whole forum on a high note, on optimism, on positivity here. So the last big idea that I wanted to tee up here was one that coalesced called Reimagining the Future of Healthcare Delivery. And the idea here is that everything we do in medical innovation really comes alive when it touches the patient. And so there are a lot of exciting things happening in the future of care delivery, and we've heard some elements of that scattered kind of throughout the conversation, both on this panel, but broadly over the past couple of days. This could be everything from agentic AI changing the nature of care delivery, as Mark talked about. It could be payment reform, as we kicked off the forum when Chris Klomp was here 2 days ago. It could be changes around models of care that are simultaneously high tech and high touch, like what's going on in community health that you heard a little bit about yesterday. So the frame of the question here for all the panelists and the input that we got from the 100 stakeholders, it covered vast areas of how the future of healthcare delivery, how care on the ground could change. If each of you could just identify one thing as we reimagine the future of healthcare delivery that you're most excited about, where innovation comes to actually touch patient care as we look into the future. I think that'll be a great way to close us out. And Paul, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one thing we really need to double down on is early diagnosis. I think many of the diseases that we treat are multi-step processes. We know in cancer that there are multiple oncogenes which have to accumulate before you actually start getting growth and certainly before you get metastasis. In rheumatology, we know that patients exhibit antibodies against citrullinated peptides 10 years before they get rheumatoid arthritis. So there's a two-step process. We also know that in Alzheimer's disease, there are many patients with heads full of amyloid who are completely fine. They have no dementia at all. Probably a two-step process. Recent studies by the Brigham suggest lithium might be involved as one of the second steps. So the idea that we could begin to really monitor for these early steps and maybe identify ways to stop the disease before it actually gets to the point where it's actually full-blown and affects the patient's health.
Nicole?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to say two, but I think a little bit about something that MGB's David Brown said at one of the opening panels, and that's we're all patients, and I think about that in my own life as a patient myself, as a parent of kids who are patients, and as a caregiver for an elderly parent who's also a patient. Meeting patients where they are, I think, is something I'm really excited about, whether that's through home hospital and sort of people who require that complicated level of care or not, and just making that whole process more seamless and efficient. But I'm also excited about the notion of prevention, and really I think that dovetails a little bit with what Paul was saying, but really preventing disease. We talk a lot about it, but I think really coming up with ways of really making that a reality.
Maurizio?
Well, I completely agree with my colleagues, but one of the most exciting ideas or things that are materializing, we lose every year over 40,000 people who die of suicide in the United States, and the great majority of them have had a contact with healthcare shortly before dying of suicide. But yet the treaters had no idea that was in the works, unfortunately. So being able to leverage AI, our Center for Precision Psychiatry, led by Jordan Smoller, has developed an AI algorithm that could help a primary care doctor or anybody who gets in contact with patients say, I know the patient looks, may look fine, but there is something here that is a great risk. And that to me will be revolutionary in care, because in some ways, we've seen how seatbelts have prevented death from car accidents. Having this technology that alerts you so that you can wear your seatbelt, you can put something to protect yourself, your life, I think is very exciting.
That's right. Mark, close us out.
Yeah, hard to add more to that. Prevention, precision medicine, these are all things I'm very excited about. In another way, I'm excited about technology's ability to, in some ways, take us back to what medicine used to be before records, and where it was a relationship between a patient and a doctor in its simplest form. And for technology to enable all the things preventing that and getting in the way to fall away. So, easy example, ambient documentation, right? So we're not looking at a computer, we're looking at the patient. Maybe instead of EKG leads in the ICU, you have a watch that's doing the same function. And maybe instead of getting your CT scan and driving an hour or two to MGH, we bring it to you, right? With mobile CT and MRI, that is sufficient quality. So I think in general, the better technology gets, the more it will fall away from the being in between the doctor and the patient, and that's kind of, from a philosophical standpoint, what I'm excited about.
Great. Well, thank you all for everything that you do in your day jobs, helping make some of this real, and for sharing your time with us today.